Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian, and let me just try to in some way repay your kind comments about me and saying what a tremendous job that you have done in leading this cause in the UK and around the world. And to show you how much respect I have for Ian, I did something I rarely do. I actually took time and actually wrote a speech in text, which those of you who have heard me speak here at Heritage have never seen me with a piece of paper in front of me. But today I wanted to take some time and put some thought behind this address, given its importance and particularly, again, my respect for Ian and the work that he's doing around the world. We are meeting here today to discuss important issues about the nature of conservatism, the state of its intellectual capital, and its governing philosophy. These are big issues for big minds, the sort that populates places like the Heritage Foundation. That being said, I am not William Buckley. I don't even do an imitation of William Buckley. I am not Russell Kirk, although I do believe in the American cause and that, in fact, conservatives do have minds. I am no Midge Decter or Irving Kristol, and no one is going to mistake me for Ed Follner. He has a bigger office than I do. I have written a rather, as Ian referred to, a lengthy book recently. Amazon.com said it weighs 1.4 pounds. Handled properly, it can harm small animals. But I am here, and I'm grateful to be here, to speak about serious issues. And they need to be discussed seriously. This is a time of unprecedented conservative power in the United States, and I use the word power intentionally. For the last decade, Republicans have controlled both houses of Congress. For 17 of the past 25 years, we've controlled the White House, and for the last 4.5 years, we've controlled both the legislative and executive branches of government. The American people have entrusted us with their future. During that time, much has been improved because much has been done. Democracy is spreading throughout the world. More people are free today. Welfare has been reformed, and millions of families have found the freedom of work, home, ownership, and liberty. Taxes have been reduced, and despite the recession, the events of 9/11, intense global competition, and nature's fury recently, the economy continues to grow. But conservatives need to remember that in the early 1960s, liberalism was the dominant governing philosophy, and it laid claim to the nation's future. At that time, it was seen as America's deliverer from the Great Depression. It helped bring civil rights to all Americans, was overseeing an unprecedented economic boom, and providing government-funded safety nets for our seniors. Within a generation, though, liberalism was in full-scale retreat. It was, rightly or wrongly, considered the philosophy of tune in, turn on, drop out, and America's humiliating defeat in Vietnam. Liberalism had been in power for oil shocks, inflation, unemployment, and stagflation. It had become a philosophy of hopelessness and malaise. In other words, things changed quickly, and liberalism splintered and failed, in no small part because it did not do what we are doing here today, taking a long, hard look at ourselves and our changing times, asking ourselves which parts of our tradition are suited for today and tomorrow's challenges, and what has become, I should say, outmoded. Let me begin with a self-criticism. There are problems in American conservatism. A decade ago, Republicans came to Washington and promised to change it rather than to be changed by it. I've talked about some of our victories. It's crucial to talk about some of our failures. We have not reduced the size of government. There is no balanced budget amendment or a balanced budget. Pork barrel and self-interest politics have grown, and special interest groups haven't been defeated, much less tamed. There are philosophical concerns as well. We are, for instance, witnessing an unprecedented rise in libertarianism. Libertarianism is rooted in grand ideals about the sanctity of liberty and freedom. You will find no argument against liberty and the virtue of liberty, or freedom's valor, in this quarter. But there are some who seem to believe that conservatism's future lies in lowering our aspirations, leaving people alone, adopting a collective no harm, no foul mentality, and do no harm individualism. This is where we disconnect with most people, because we disconnect with how people live their lives. People don't live their lives as radical individualists. It doesn't work. Nor do they live their lives as pathetic dependents, which is all too often the result of policies of the left. Both sides seem to be talking about an ideological utopia, ungrounded in reality. We have long recognized the folly of the left's worldview, but to avoid a similar fall, we must ask ourselves the hard questions and make corrections when needed, and to ensure the success of the conservative movement as well as the American experiment. With that mission, I'd like to take this time to talk about conservative philosophy and make a few suggestions of my own. Let's start with our roots. Intellectual conservatism was once defined by two clear goals: the defeat of communism and the reduction in the size and scope and sweep of government. The former was perhaps best captured by the great Ronald Reagan, who rightly declared the former Soviet Union as the evil empire, while the latter was most accurately described by the great Margaret Thatcher as the nanny state. There are three observations I'd like to make about this conservatism. First, it was a conservatism with a purpose. The goal of ending the scourge of communism wasn't so that we might be left all alone to do our own thing, but to eliminate oppression, increase liberty, and enable freedom. Eliminating the evil empire was absolutely about protecting America and Americans, but it was also about setting captives free. It was about lifting the yoke of oppression from millions of innocent people who wanted to be free. Similarly, limiting government scope wasn't just about making the budget smaller or closing some departments. The purpose of limited government was the expansion of the unlimited potential of the human person. Second, it was a conservatism with definable objectives. We could tell whether or not communism was eliminated and government was reduced. Third, it was a conservatism of hope. For many decades, it seemed altogether unlikely the world would ever see the end of the Soviet Union. The Cold War seemed to be getting hotter and hotter, while America's morale got lower and lower. But we never gave up. We never stopped believing in the rightness of our cause. Purpose, objective, and hope. Those were the hallmarks of a conservatism that quite literally saved the world. They should also be the defining characteristics of conservatism's future. Is that possible? I obviously believe it is. And I believe what we call compassionate conservatism has something unique to offer to the shaping of that future. But before I define the particular contributions that we have to offer, let me make two observations. First, conservatives in general hold in common, at least here in the U.S., a commitment to a strong national defense, the promotion of democracy, vibrant economic growth through low taxation, less regulation, and an unencumbered free market, and a recognition of the limits of government as successful social engineers. These principles I embrace as our common denominator. Second, the competitor to conservatism's future, I believe, is libertarianism. It is a consistent and vibrant, although I believe misguided, strain of conservatism. America's conservative heritage never pursued a limitless freedom to do whatever one wants as long as no one else is hurt. That kind of freedom to be and do whatever we want, irrespective of the choice, is a selfish freedom that cannot be sustained or afforded. Someone always gets hurt when the masses of individuals do whatever is only in their own self-interest. That is the great lie of liberal and libertarian freedom, or as I like to say, no-fault freedom. All the choice, none of the responsibility. We here today believe in something altogether different. It is the liberty America's founders understood properly defined. Freedom is liberty coupled with responsibility to something bigger or higher than self. It is a selfless freedom. It is a sacrificial freedom. It is the pursuit of our dreams with the eye toward the common good. Freedom is the dual activity of lifting our eyes to the heavens while reaching our hands out to our neighbor. The only orthodox conservative philosophy that matches with this is compassionate conservatism. What is it? Compassionate conservatism is rooted in the general welfare and relies on healthy families, freedom of faith, and a vibrant civil society, a proper understanding of the individual, and a focused government to achieve noble purposes through definable objectives, which offers hope to all, including and especially those in poverty. Ironically, for all of the chatter about it during the last number of years, it is still an emerging philosophy. It hasn't even been tried as a governing philosophy, in my opinion. From one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other, Republican passion for compassionate conservatism has waned as other more important pressing matters took center stage. For some, this lack of action was meant or seen as a discouragement. Others, it was seen simply through cynical eyes. But the truth is that this compassionate conservative philosophy is the only viable conservative philosophy we Republicans possess. There are four cornerstones to this compassionate conservatism. First, compassionate conservatism is founded on the family. The family is the foundation of an effectively functioning civil society. There is nothing more simple or more basic than this one fact: kids need moms and dads. This is not a place for government to be neutral. Common sense and social science research are in accord on this fact. Children in father-absent homes are 2 times more likely to abuse drugs, to be sexually active, to be physically abused, to become more involved in crime. They're 3 times more likely to fail in school and commit suicide, and 5 times more likely to live in poverty. And that isn't all. Families set standards and demand that children live up to them. Strong families are grounded in a moral code of conduct, in values, and much more often than not, a shared faith. Plus judicious use of the age-old sanctions, I use often in my family, of shame and stigma. Families teach us about the essential democratic virtue of selflessness. The mantra of the popular culture, quote, "If it feels good, do it," end quote, just doesn't wash in a family. Why are these things important? Because these statistics are all about all of us. These kids aren't nameless, faceless Social Security numbers with arms and legs. They are our neighbors. And all of us want, and America needs, good neighbors. These children are made in the image of God, so we must help their parents protect them. And they are our country's future. We can't make it without them. We could spend trillions of dollars and have every public school with personal valets and individual tutors. Every child in America could be given $1,000 a month in government allowances to spend as they wish. But none of it will make a difference unless our children are raised in healthy families. 10 years after a marriage breaks up, research has shown that approximately 2/3 of children report that they haven't seen their father in over a year. That said, I have 2 important caveats. First, lots of single parents do a wonderful job in raising their children. It may not have been their first, second, third, or fourth choice, but that is the hand that they have been dealt, and they fight every day for the hearts and souls of their children. They deserve our help, support, and prayers. Second, family is not a code word. I'm not talking about any particular group of people. Healthy families are needed in every zip code, in every demographic group in America. There are unhealthy families in the Hamptons and at Queensgate, London. It is very much about fathers. And father absent isn't just about men who get women pregnant and then abandon them. It's about divorce and emotional detachment as well. Middle-class men whose lives center around work and the golf course instead of around wives and children, for example. Second, compassionate conservatism believes in the transformative power of faith and the integral role of charities, houses of worship, and other civil institutions. If government is to be effective, these institutions must be respected and nurtured rather than overpowered or effectively controlled by the government. Societies deteriorate absent freedom of religion and effective mediating institutions. This may sound overblown, but it isn't. Taken as a whole, these institutions and the people that create them is what is known as social capital. They work together for our mutual benefit, creating much more as a whole than they are in their parts. They instill values and bind us together in a common cause. These bonds build trust, which is the grease that makes the gears of society run without friction. How do we strengthen these media institutions so they help restore social capital? The most important answer is to build up what the village elders, as I refer to in my book, or the liberal elites, have spent decades trying to tear down and drive underground, and that's religious institutions and faith-based organizations. The Democrats in this country now espouse European-style secularism, with all due respect to my colleagues from across the seas. They have gone to great lengths to create government bureaucracies to displace the work that religious groups have done ever since the days of the Pilgrims, and to marginalize and privatize faith and its black and white moral demands. Their approach to expansive government regulation and programming has worked in countless ways to sideline the people of faith. This is a tragic mistake, as many Europeans are now sadly recognizing. Faith is the great protector of our freedoms. We are endowed by our Creator, as our founding document said, and we are the poorer when we forget it. When we talk about faith, we are talking about a principled pluralism where all faiths are taken seriously and all people of all faiths are treated with absolute equality. Third, compassionate conservatism is founded on an inviolable belief in humanity's inherent dignity. Bill Gates' intrinsic worth is the same as yours. Yours is the same as your cab driver, and your cab driver is the same as the woman now dying of AIDS in Africa. The 50 million orphans we currently know of have every bit the same worth as each one of my 6 children. I'm not suggesting we hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I got in trouble for saying that once a while ago. But I am saying that humanity's inherent dignity is a massive responsibility we have no choice but to embrace. That means abortion, which ends life at its beginning, and euthanasia, which takes life before it reaches its natural conclusion, undermines human dignity. It means that genocide destroys human dignity, and ending it must be in our strategic interest. We must step up and lead, because that's what compassionate conservatives do when we see suffering and injustice. We need to continue to fight international sex trafficking and oppose the oppression of minority groups, and promote and respect religious freedom and tolerance around the world. Fourth, compassionate conservatism targets the poor and the hurting for help. To many of my colleagues, when I see them, they act as if poverty doesn't exist in America. Well, then came Katrina. Our collective blinders were shredded, not by the wind or rain, but by our television sets. We will all remember the picture of New Orleans, the poor and the sick, who were forced into the light of day and into our collective consciousness by the waters of this horrible flood. Theologically, there is an idea of an age of accountability, a certain age when a girl becomes a woman, a boy becomes a man. After that age, they have to stand before God on their own. Katrina brought America to the age of accountability when it comes to caring for the poor. No one No one can deny the persistent and noxious poverty that still plagues this country. Just as Katrina seared American poverty into our moral consciousness, AIDS has seared Africa into our moral vision. Caring for the sick and dying in Africa now is morally right, and it is geopolitically prudent. For if we don't help, I can guarantee you that someone else will, and that someone else will not be a friend of the interests of the United States. This is a time of unparalleled crisis in Africa and other developing countries around the world. That is why I believe we need to embrace and challenge to dedicate more of our GDP to foreign aid, as well as to encourage more international trade with developing countries. History will judge this moment, not by what we say, but by what we do in helping our neighbors. Perhaps this is what is meant by the term severe mercy of God. There's an old spiritual that sings of how the great life-giver, giving river of God will lift us up and over the barriers that separate us. The river will make old walls irrelevant. Well, the rivers have come. The walls have been breached, and it is now our responsibility to see that new life comes after the catastrophe, not more of the same. There's much more that could be said, and that needs to be said, but I will leave that task to the professionals here at Heritage. A couple of final points. This will require a role for government. Now that some conservatives will find somewhat disquieting. But there is a discomfort worth confronting. For far too long, there has been an implied belief that government was the problem. If government just stepped out of the way, everything would be fine. This is philosophical nonsense. Government is as important as any vital societal structure that orders our lives. It is a time for conservatives to stop treating government as if its elimination were the highest good that could come to humankind. It also means that politicians like me have to start saying some hard truths, that there are things government can't afford to do as much as we did in the past. Everyone running for office likes to promise everything while saying it will cost nothing. But that's Willy Wonka politics. We're going to have to look at everything, from our favorite pork projects to entitlements, and to make tough decisions about how the changing role of government, how we have to change the role of government in our lives. That includes not only cutting the old, but putting forth new initiatives, like the CARE Act. It's a bold package, very much in line with what I've been talking about, expanding charitable giving incentives. I'm introducing it with Senator Lieberman this week. We must do this to help replenish those who are out there in the fields, the faith-based and community organizations. And because we believe people motivated to serve are people who make our country unique and sustain our social capital into the future. We must be on the side of the traditional family. We have a lot more work to do with welfare. So many have been helped out, but many more still languish in poverty, as we know. We have to take some bold steps and set some bold agendas. We should, for example, try to cut the rate of divorce and out-of-wedlock births by 30% over the next decade. Before anyone dismisses this as just political rhetoric and flourishes, I want to say that they're doable. In fact, communities like Chattanooga, Tennessee, and others have done so with a concerted commitment. Having said that, we can't write one great law in Washington that will make everything right. These objectives are doable because, like in Chattanooga, people who are out there on the front lines, who take the responsibility and duty themselves, are caring for society. Compassionate conservatives seek to unleash the charity and creative energy of our citizens in a new war on poverty, a war from the family up. A war waged by a volunteer army, a war in which the poor themselves are the most important combatants, all facilitated by government policy that get bureaucracy out of the way and American creativity, energy, and compassion center staged. In fact, Senate Republicans have developed an anti-poverty agenda. I know Dan Coates would be shocked to hear that, with respect to the critical role and work and investment in neighborhoods and empowering families and individuals in need. Compassionate conservatism didn't begin in the 90s or in the 80s or in any other time in recent memory. Arguably, it goes back to the early notions about the nature of the republic in the day before there were civilizing tools like a Starbucks latte. But there was no more certain example for me than that of the work of William Wilberforce. It was Wilberforce's band of unlikely friends who moved the levers of government, faith, and culture against the abomination known as the slave trade. Time and again, he suffered mockery, defeat, and desperation. But he never gave up, because he knew what he wanted to achieve was worthy of his all. And because he knew he had the purpose, objective, and hope to achieve it. I believe, and I hope we all believe, the same is true for us today. That's why this gathering of conservatives from both sides of the Atlantic is so encouraging to me. A last lesson from Lady Thatcher and President Reagan. We must never forget hope. Hope was what allowed Reagan and Thatcher to see that a nuclear freeze was folly, that communism was corrupt, and that freedom would win. It is easy for us now on the other side of history to see how axiomatic these truths were. It was less clear then. Remember the great marches. We saw some this weekend, where millions wanted us to unilaterally freeze weapons production. How about the mocking of a military defense shield that could threaten Soviet first strike capability? The simple idea of it terrified the Kremlin. No, conservatism is based on the idea of preserving the good of our society, adding to it the wisdom of experience, and coupling it with the courage and optimism of a new generation. This formula inspired Reagan and Thatcher to dare to hope and to work together across the Atlantic to build a better world. Let us build upon their example so we, in this generation, can be that beacon of hope to this troubled world. Thank you. Happy to take a few questions, if there are any. Yes, Mr. Fagan?
Senator, do you